Well, welcome everybody. I think we will have a couple more people coming in here. I'm Stevie, and that's Shauna that you heard just a second ago. This event is part of Winter Bike Week, which is an annual Zeitgeist event dedicated to promoting and celebrating active living and, getting outside and outdoor recreation in the winter. So you can find a little bit more information about that at the links in the chat. And I'll hand it over to Shauna.
Thanks. I realized my entire presentation was advancing like every time I push a button. Sorry. Well, I'm so glad that you all are here today to talk about winter bike commuting. And as Stevie mentioned, my name is Shauna, and I'm a league cycling instructor, which is a certification through the League of American Bicyclists, which is a national bike advocacy and education organization. So I do a number of these kinds of bike commute courses. In the summertime, I do one that's really just geared towards safety and road rules and things like that. And then we're going to get an abbreviated version of that for this one. But a couple of things to note is that we are recording this. I think you got a message when you came on. And so I think Stevie has your email addresses and can send this out afterwards, because I did include some hyperlinks in some of these slides for things for you to check out afterwards that you can click on. This is also, it's geared toward new people who are new to winter cycling, but inevitably we always get people who are seasoned riders. And so if you have if you're one of those people and you have tips or anything to add, I welcome that conversation, because I'm by no means have all the answers. And I think, there's a lot of different ways you can do things when it comes to winter cycling. So feel free to add your 2 cents if it is relevant. Stevie will monitor the chat box. So if you do have questions, you can put them in there and she can interrupt me as we're going with those. Or I don't know, I don't think there's a raise hand feature in Zoom.
There is, yeah.
But
Just go to the bottom and hit reactions, and then there's a little raise hand bar at the bottom.
Perfect. So I can call on people as we go. Otherwise, I also will just stop from time to time to check in and see if people have questions. And just generally what we're going to talk about, we're going to have the first half of the presentation is going to be about rules of the road and just safety and etiquette for bike commuting in general that apply all year long. And then the second half is going to be more winter specific tips for riding in the winter. So I always just like to start out with kind of my bike commuting story. I started bike commuting to work about 7 years ago, or 8 maybe. I hadn't been on a bike in ages, and I really only went to work maybe once or twice a month on my bike. But as I kept doing it more and more and really learned to love it, winter came a couple years later, and I was like, I'm just going to try this biking in winter, even though I kind of thought people who biked in winter were crazy. I was like, I'm just going to do it. So I tried it, and it was awful, and I was miserable, and I hated it. And I was like, well, I gave it a try. I'm not going to do that anymore. But then the next year came, and I, again, just didn't want to have to put my bike away for the winter. So I gave it another try. It went a little bit better. But what was really kind of the turning point for me was going to the Winter Cycling Congress, which happened in the Twin Cities in 2016. And it was just a really great conference, and I'll talk more about that. But all that to say that people, don't just wake up one day, usually. This is my cat, Murphy. She's going to help. She knows a lot about winter biking. People don't usually just wake up one day and decide that they're going to bike year round. So don't be intimidated by that. Like, if you want to give it a try, even if it's not fantastic at the beginning and you want to stick it out, I mean, you really do learn a lot as you go, and as you become more comfortable with it, it'll get easier and more fun. And don't think that you have to just jump, both feet first or head first right into it. You can take baby steps. So that is my story, but I would like to know about all of you. And I saw somebody answered in the chat already, but Stevie's going to put up a poll. to answer a question about how you would describe your current biking situation. And then the second question is just asking what you're hoping to get out of this. If you just want to answer that one in the chat box, and we can take a look at it. And I have an outline for this presentation, but if there are certain things that people want to be sure to cover, we can try to squeeze it in and make sure all of your questions are answered. And I think we have, okay, so 5, 3, 4. Okay, 2 more people. Yep, see, I knew it. There's somebody in here who already bikes year-round. 2 people. Awesome. Okay, everybody can see these results, right, Stevie, up here on in real time?
Yeah, I hope so. I think so.
Okay, so 3 people said that so if it was on a scale of 1 to 5, 3 people were at a 2, where they bike generally for recreation sometimes, but usually not for commuting or transportation purposes. And then 2 people who bike regularly year-round. That's awesome. And let's see, I'm gonna pull up the chat here and see if there's anything in there that people have added. Duluth has fewer bike lanes for sure. Yep. Fat tires, we'll talk about that. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna cover all of this stuff. So good. Oh, and there's one more thing I think that just came in. Okay. All right. Now my slideshow is not going forward. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start with safety on the road, and basically kind of 2 things to think about or keep in mind are that cyclists have the same rights and responsibilities as motorists. So when you're on the road, you are treated as, or you have to act like any other vehicle on the road. And then cyclists are best when they act and are treated as drivers of vehicles. So basically, I mean, there is a caveat to this. So what I'm about to talk to you about is how you drive your bike basically on the road with cars. However, I realize that that is very intimidating and is only necessary because we do not have good bike infrastructure. In an ideal world, we would be able to ride our bikes on separated paths and not have to worry about interacting very much with vehicle traffic. So that being said, all of these things are tips and you know, the bike laws and traffic principles and things, like, it can be intimidating. And you know, as you practice and get better and more comfortable, you'll be able to do this kind of stuff more and more, and you will see like that other road users react more positively around you generally when you're doing these things. So first of all, drive your bike, be predictable. We're going to talk about lane positioning in a little bit, but generally, being predictable just helps communicate what your intents are to other vehicles on the roadway. Be visible if you're going to wear lights, or if you're going to wear, let me start over. Be visible. Lights are required at dusk and at night. So you have to have a front white light and a rear red reflector is what the requirement is. But of course, a light on the back is highly recommended. Reflective gear, if you don't mind looking like a traffic cone, this is an option. And we always tell people, it's always, the reflective stuff is about movement. So if you're going to use it, it's best if you put it on your body, because as you are moving, that's how people can tell that you are a cyclist and that you're there. Wear a helmet, self-explanatory. ABC quick check. This is just a quick check you should do on your bike before you take off anytime. A stands for air, you know, check your tires. B stands for brakes. This just means, you know, squeezing the brake levers and making sure that the brake levers aren't hitting your handlebar, because you're going to lose some braking power if that's the case. There's a little barrel adjuster on on the brake lever if you do need to tighten that up. You can find videos of this too on online if you want to find out exactly what that is. C stands for chains, cassette, and cranks. This is just basically like checking over your chain, making sure there's no debris in it. You can spin the pedals around a couple times and make sure that they are running smoothly. And then quick is quick releases, just checking those. They're the little tabs that are on the little levers that are on your wheels. Sometimes a seat post has them, but if they pop open, your wheel is going to be loose. So just check those and make sure they're tight. And then the check in ABC Quick Check is just to take off slowly and kind of feel and listen to your bike for the first, couple 100 feet before you cruise off and make sure everything feels okay. So, some traffic principles when you're riding on the road with traffic. First come, first serve. Our streets are public spaces and they're available to whoever is there first. Drivers don't always respect this when it comes to bikes on the road, but just some general, your general principles too of like whoever gets to a stop sign first has the right of way to proceed first. Checking, before you switch lanes and making sure nobody is in that lane. All of those things apply to bicyclists. Ride on the right. This means ride on the right side of the road with the flow of traffic. Um, Here is a visualization of why that's the safest thing to do and is the legal thing to do. You can see two bicyclists here. One is going the right way, one is going the wrong way, and then driver A and driver B are going to make a couple of turns, and you can see the shaded gray area is where their field of view is. That's where they're looking for oncoming traffic. So the person who's biking the wrong way, these drivers are not likely to see them. And so um, that's why it is important to be on the right side of the road, because that is where car drivers are looking as they're preparing to cross streets and make turning movements. You're not expecting anybody to be coming down the road in the wrong direction. Yield the right of way when appropriate. So the rules of yielding on the road are the same as for every other roadway user. And one thing that happens a lot with bicyclists is that people who are driving, maybe they're trying to be nice, but either way, even if whatever reason they're doing it for, they don't understand or they don't realize that the same rules apply to bicyclists. So they'll stop to try to let a bicyclist cross the road or do something when the bicyclist doesn't actually have the right of way. And this can be really dangerous actually, because say a car is coming down the road, they don't have a stop sign, but there's a bike at the intersection and they just stop to try to let you cross. Like they wouldn't do that for a car, so they shouldn't do it for a bike, but it also causes confusion for other road users who may have no idea why they're stopping in the middle of the road when there's no stop sign. They may try to go around them because they don't see the bicyclist. So when people do this, there are very few instances when I will actually then take the right of way. I'll usually just wave them through and, they have the right of way and they should go. Speed positioning, this is just a pretty basic principle that I think most people understand. As a slow-moving vehicle, you should stay on the rightmost traveling lane that serves your destination. So, actually, I'll talk more about that on the lane positioning one, but just generally, as a slow-moving vehicle, you should be on the right-hand side or the rightmost lane. Intersection positioning, this is where you're putting your bike as you're approaching an intersection. And the key here is that where you put yourself in the driving lane helps communicate to other drivers where you intend to go. So you would not want to go straight through an intersection on a right turn only lane. You would not want to make a left turn from a right turn only lane, because that is part of being, that's part of being predictable, is doing what you should be doing in each lane. So if you're going straight through an intersection, this is another situation where it's not just like, oh, go in the straight through lane, but where you put yourself in the driving lane is also important. So here's a visualization that kind of describes that. I don't know if this lane that the bike is in, I don't know if it's a bike lane or a shoulder or what. It doesn't even have to be anything. This could just be one full travel lane. But as you can see from the picture on the left, if you're kind of hugging the right-hand side of the road and you're trying to go straight through, you don't want a car to be able to come up on your left and take a right in front of you and cut you off and cause a crash. Instead, you should do what it shows on the right-hand side. If you are going straight through the intersection, you don't want people passing you, so you should be more toward the middle of the lane, and then if people are going to take a right, they can move off to your right hand side. So both of these situations, like in the one on the left, nothing is being done illegally by anyone. um, but I like to show this because even though it's not illegal, it's obviously dangerous. And it is, you do have some control over what other drivers on the roadway are doing. So we don't have to just be like, I don't know, victims isn't the right word, but of the situation. As a bicyclist, where you position yourself on the roadway can influence what other drivers are doing and can help them not make mistakes. Lane positioning. This is which I guess this I talked about this on the intersection positioning, but this is like which travel lane you would be moving in. If you're, again, like if you're making a left-hand turn, you should be in the left turn lane, keeping in mind that if you don't want to go in the middle of the road because it's intimidating, you can always pull off to the side and use the crosswalks to get across and do a 2-point turn to get across the street if there's just like really heavy traffic or you just don't feel comfortable with it. But you just want to avoid positioning yourself where you're going to be, making a turn or going straight through in a lane that is not designated for that. And lastly, obey. Oh, I don't know what I did there. There we go. Obey all traffic signs and signals, even though they're created for motor vehicles, not bicyclists. So that's a lot of times bicyclists will have to do things like they'll maybe roll through or start early on a stop sign for safety purposes, but the law is that we obey all traffic signs and signals just like anybody else on the roadway would do. Are there any questions about the safety slash traffic law, things like that? We're kind of moving a little bit quickly because I have like 45 slides and I'm doing the math, about 1 hour, 45 slides. That's just some basic general stuff. Let's see. I don't see anything in the chat box, but if anybody has anything on that, I'll give it a minute. It's a lot to take in. Okay. I'm taking that as a no. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about winter biking and some tips and tricks to use for that. So the first thing that I like to talk about is the mindset, because inevitably every time, like this happened to me at the dentist. I went to the dentist this morning and they were like, "You rode your bike? Like, aren't you cold?" So there's this mindset for people who don't do it, that it is this really extreme, like harsh kind of thing. But what I imagine and how I like to talk about winter cycling is like what you see here. If kids can do it, we can sure give it a try. And kind of more of a background on sort of how my mind was changed about it was I talked about the Winter Cycling Congress that happened a few years ago. Part of that event was that we were going to go on a big group ride, and the group ride of all these conference participants, like 150 people or something like that, it was led by a 4th grade bike club. So that's when I was like, wait a minute, if 4th graders are leading this ride, like this is something I can probably figure out how to do. And granted, they had experience. They didn't just like grab their bikes and decide they were going to go out and bike in the winter. They were in a bike club, so they had been going all year round with this teacher who was teaching them about traffic safety and how do you drive your bike. And they got really good at their bike handling skills, and they were experienced fourth graders, but they still figured it out, and they were leading this bike ride in the winter. So there's a picture of the ride, and capturing some of the people that were on that ride at that event. But for mindset, start in the fall and build up your tolerance. That's a great way to get into it. You don't even have to go all the way through the winter, but if you are starting in the fall, it's so much easier to kind of slowly realize as the temperature gets colder, the conditions change. It's like you only have to adapt usually to one change or small amounts of change instead of like deciding in February that you're going to start winter cycling. That can be a lot tougher to just go out and do it. It can certainly be done, and if you want to do it, please do it. But if you're more interested in kind of slowly working up, start in the fall. You can take baby steps. Like I said earlier, nobody expects anybody to just jump right into this and be biking every day of the year. You will get better at it as you experiment and as you practice, and you'll become more comfortable with it, and you'll be able to bike in increasingly more challenging conditions as you go. You can always get off your bike and walk it. Sometimes I'm like, do we really have to say that? But we do, because sometimes I think people get stuck in this mentality that like you're not really a winter biker if you're not biking every step of the way or every block that you go. But absolutely that you're not cheating if you get off and walk your bike. Even if you have to bail, we have bike racks on all of the buses year round in Duluth. So learn how to use the bike racks. They're not as intimidating as you might think, and the bus drivers are incredibly helpful. Like if you don't know how to use it, they'll come and they'll show you how to do it. You can use Lyft or Uber if you need a ride, or call a friend. Lock your bike up and leave it somewhere safe and come back for it later if you have to. And then just like enjoy it. It can be a little intimidating at first, but once you are more comfortable, it really is pretty fun. So lastly, on the mindset, this is back to my visit to the dentist when people are like, oh, isn't that so cold? But we live in Minnesota and we do all of these things all winter long to enjoy the outdoors. And nobody really says like, oh my gosh, you walk your dog in the winter? That's crazy. But it really is, it's the same as all of these things, ice fishing and snowmobiling and just playing outside and skiing and skating and all these outdoor activities. Winter bike commuting, and even on bikes, people, fat biking on the trails is not really seen as this crazy thing to do. And likewise with getting on a bike, it's not, for transportation, it's not any colder than any of these other things, probably warmer actually, because you're moving. All right, so another thing that people always want to know about is the gear. So I put in this little clip from this video, and I actually encourage everybody to watch the whole thing. It's 15 minutes long, and it's by this guy he's Canadian, but he lives in the Netherlands, and he made a video about Finland and why people can bike in the winter in Finland, but they don't do it in Canada. So he found that there is really just one factor that determines how much winter cycling you have in any city in the world. I will give you a clue. It is not temperature. So you should watch this video to find out what it is. And then there are basically just two things that need to be done to encourage people to bike more in the winter. And he talks about that too. But this is the gear section. Stevie, tell me if the sound doesn't come through. Okay.
Some people like to talk about the gear you need for winter cycling, so I'll share what I would typically wear when cycling in winter.
Almost everywhere.
First, I recommend a jacket.
Oh, we're good. Sorry.
Well, I paused it, so I don't know what happened. I heard that too. I'm gonna start it again.
Jacket. This is like a big warm shirt that you wear over your clothes. Next, you'll need gloves. These are kind of like shoes, but for your hands, which is why both the Dutch and the Germans call them hand shoes. I'd also recommend one of these woolen head coverings. People call these by many different names, but they're all wrong. It's called a toque. Now that you've got your specialized gear, you're ready to go cycling in the winter. Now, when the temperatures get really cold, like below -20 degrees, you'll want to wear more layers and a scarf. But it's exactly the same kind of clothing that Canadians routinely wear when skiing, snowmobiling, or doing any other kind of winter activity. You can even get pogies for your bike to keep your hands warm, just like they do for snowmobiles. These are great.
Okay, so obviously the point here is that you don't need specialized gear necessarily for biking in the wintertime. So don't get hung up on that. You really can use a lot of stuff that you might use for anything else that you're doing outside in the wintertime. Most of it will work just fine. But that being said, we will talk about some tips and tricks for things that you can wear, gear, equipment, stuff like that in the next few slides. Go to the next slide. No.
Thankfully, several frigid...
Okay. So the basics of how to dress, this is it's individualized. You have to go through trial and error a little bit because everybody is a little bit different. It's trying to figure out just the right amount of clothing, which is almost impossible. I still haven't figured it out, even though I've been biking in winter for several years. You should be chilly when starting because you will warm up pretty quickly. It is exercise, you're moving your body. And the thing to think about really is the wind. So you can wear something that might be pretty warm just as you're out walking, but as soon as you're on the bike and you're going down the road, blocking that wind, that cold wind, is kind of the key when you're thinking about what to wear. You want to avoid getting sweaty if you can, but we have hills here. So again, I don't know, I think that's almost impossible, but wearing insulating layers that breathe is important. And just thinking about like, this is a really active thing. So it's not a sport, but clothes for active winter sports are often work well for bike commuting because you're going to be pretty warm. Bring your layers, have a way to carry them with, a backpack or a pannier on your bike. If you can figuring out like a way to carry stuff that's a year-round thing to consider if you're biking at any time of the year for commuting purposes. But that's pretty, like, we're all Minnesotans. We know how to layer. Use all of your Minnesota winter knowledge on layering. And then you can use a thermometer once you have been doing this for a while, you can kind of know like what do you need at certain temperatures. So checking the temp before you go out, because even, we need gloves, but what kind of gloves? It depends on how cold it is. And then learn your cold spots and try to figure out creative solutions. And again, don't agonize over bike specific gear and clothing. It's certainly available if you want to purchase. Like, there's everything you can think of for winter biking, and you can absolutely get that if you want to, but don't let that be a thing that stops you. So here's an example of kind of how you would use the thermometer to know where to start when it comes to dressing appropriately. So 50 to 60 degrees, that seems warm, pretty warm, but that on a bike, again with the wind, like, it gets chilly. So that's the temperature where I would actually start putting on like a wind jacket, a thin hat, and gloves. Definitely gloves are the thing that I always usually start with first. I might not even need a jacket, but my hands get cold, so I'll be wearing gloves when it's 60 degrees on my bike. 30 to 40 degrees, you'll want to add an insulating, light shirt like a fleece sweater, adding maybe the next kind of level of gloves that are windproof. Toe covers, I've never used those, but they work apparently pretty well. I don't know. And this is the temperature too where I add a scarf to cover my face, because that's when it gets cold on my face, is 30 to 40 degrees. At about 25 degrees, I start adding on a layer onto my legs. So you can do either something underneath your, like street clothes, So if you have leggings or long underwear, something like that to go underneath your whatever you're wearing, that's a great idea. Otherwise, doing some kind of wind barrier over your pants works pretty well too. This is when you might want to think about doing using a balaclava, which is like those almost full head covered. I don't know what they're made of exactly, like neoprene or something, but where just like your eyes are showing. I personally don't like these because I don't think they're very breathable, and they also like get wet from the condensation from breathing. So I've found that pretty much any temperature I can use like a knit scarf because it's thick enough that it's warm, but it also like I need the air to come through it so that I can breathe while I'm biking. This is also when you might want to consider switching out your helmet and using either a ski helmet, or they make bike helmets for winter. I'll show a picture of that shortly here. Using wool socks, and then this is also the temperature range when I switch into winter boots from just like, regular shoes that I might be wearing. And then once it gets into the single digits, that is when I go for my goggles. And I resisted goggles for a long time because I think they look ridiculous, um, but just like ski goggles that go over your eyes I couldn't believe how much of a difference that made. It feels like you are in a little heated bubble. You can walk outside when it is below zero and you can't even tell because it's just goggles. Like, it's amazing how warm they keep you. And then this is also when I switched to some pretty heavy duty, like the best, warmest mittens that I have. And personally, I use either some thick insulated ski mittens, or for the coldest option, I will use like a wool, those really thick Fox River, I think they're called, mittens, and then I put leather choppers over the top because that's a good wind-proof solution. Clothing, again, I think this is not news to any of us, but your base layer, if you're going to have a base layer to be wicking, so cotton is not a good idea because that doesn't wick. So using wool or a synthetic base layer is a good idea. And then your insulating layer you want over that could be wool or fleece. One of the kind of key things that I always make sure to have is neck zippers because that will work wonders for temperature regulation. Honestly, in the wintertime, most people who bike in winter will tell you you're much more likely to be too warm than you are to be too cold, and overdressing is kind of I always overdress. And so having those neck zippers to be able to let some air in and cool off is really nice and convenient. Wear enough to stay warm but not sweat, because then you will get cold when you stop. And you should start out a little bit cold because you'll get warm as you start riding. Your outerwear, you can use pretty much anything that's wind and water resistant. Again, like, they make stuff for bikes, but really I just use a rain jacket from Eddie Bauer, I think is where I got mine, and it's perfect. And you want to avoid like completely waterproof things that don't breathe, like Gore-Tex. Again, the venting zippers are amazing. So my jacket has like armpit vent zippers, and they work wonders for temperature regulation, because when you're on a bike, the air just kind of like goes right in, and it's like it just circulates everywhere and goes in your jacket, and it works really well. And then on your lower body, again, you can do any combination of like an insulating layer under your street clothes, and you can do a windproof layer over. And then that's convenient too. I usually like to do that because wherever you're going, you can just pull that off when you get there, and you don't actually have to change. It just slides on, if you're doing like wind pants or something over your pants. Some other clothing pieces to think about is having a hat under your helmet. If you can find one that have ear flaps, that's even better. Windproof, that's even better. Ski helmets work really well, or like year-round, kind of like all-purpose, all-sport type helmets are really great. Some people do use hoods on their jacket. I don't like doing that because it's kind of like a parachute and it like gets all the wind kind of catches in it. So if you are going to use a hood, you have to make sure that you can kind of cinch it down around, that like fits over your helmet, but that you can cinch down so that it doesn't catch the wind. Helmet covers are available as well, and that's really great for keeping water out if it's raining or snowing, and can keep the heat in a little bit better too, especially if you have a helmet that has a lot of vents on it. A neck warmer or a scarf. Yeah, nothing really to say about that, just that your face is the most exposed part of your body when you're on a bike, so keeping it warm is a must. Ski goggles, I kind of covered that already too. You can use anti-fogs. They have like a spray if you're running into them fogging up. I haven't had an issue with that, but that can be used if those are fogging up. And then ski goggles, I guess one other thing to say about ski goggles too, they really keep you warm. I still only use them when I absolutely have to, because they do limit your vision, especially like your peripheral vision, just because they're just this big thing on your face. And so it makes it harder to see. And so there's kind of a trade-off there with the ski goggles. And that's why I will typically only wear them when I absolutely have to. Gloves, this is personal preference. There are some options. Lobster gloves are the kind of gloves, I have a picture on the next slide, that they are split down the middle so that you can keep your hands on your handlebar and still brake with just a couple of fingers instead of having to put your entire hand over both the handle and the brake lever. You can use, reheatable hand warmers or like those chemical ones, and bar mitts that we saw in the video is another good option that work really well. And they even make heated ones too, I think. I haven't tried them because my commute is not very long, so I haven't needed them. For shoes, I just wear my regular winter snow boots. Again, this is where having a windproof kind of boot is really helpful. So I was using my Steger Mucklucks for a while. That did not work because those are leather or moose hide. No, what are they? They're not windproof. That is for sure. So that wasn't working very well. So having something that is more weatherproof works well, but it doesn't have to be anything special, just winter boots, snow boots. They make booties and toe covers that you can add onto your shoes or boots that can help with keeping them weatherproof and with heat. You can double your socks. You can use the plastic bag trick. I've never tried this, but people swear by it. This is like, when you were a kid and your boots are leaking water and your mom makes you put bread bags on your feet. That's what the plastic bag trick is, to keep your feet warm. And then they also you can add like insulating sole inserts into your shoes if you need a little bit more insulation. So here's just a couple pictures of a couple of the things I just talked about. The lobster claw gloves, the bar mitts, we saw that in the video. This helmet is a bike helmet for winter. This is the same helmet that I have, and I absolutely love it. And it is so warm that all I need to put underneath it is a hat like the one in the picture above it. It's just a thin wool, kind of like a liner hat. But these helmets that have those ear flaps are so warm on your ears, and I just should have gotten this kind of helmet years ago because it's amazing. And then you can take those thick pads out if you need to. They're removable. And then they're nice too because they have the little clip on the back of the helmet to hold your strap of your goggles if you're using them. So I would highly recommend that style of a helmet in the wintertime. And then just like their vents and stuff too, because they're made for winter. The venting is necessary, but it is designed in a way where you're not going to lose as much heat, or where that cold air is going to come into your helmet as easily. Okay, equipment. This is another thing where it's like, just like the gear that the guy talked about in the video, you really can use any bike. It's based on preference and comfort. And when I say any bike, I really do mean any bike. I've seen people, and I for 1 year also used a skinny tire bike, and you have to ride it a little bit more carefully. But in when it's like mashed potato snow, it actually cuts through that kind of like sticky slush stuff a lot easier than bigger tires. And a lot of people will also just buy like a bike that they use just in the winter time. So if you found one that was like cheap on, Facebook Marketplace or something like that, it doesn't really matter if it gets road salt and stuff on it because it's designated as, winter. But the key thing is to just be comfortable when you're riding. So, if you like more of an upright kind of bike versus one where you're leaning over your bike, you just want to make sure that you're comfortable. Mountain bikes and fat bikes are really popular options for winter biking because they have like thicker or like wider tires, and they have a lot of knobby rubber pieces on them, so there's more traction. There is a trade-off because if you're going to ride a fat bike for commuting on the road, you have more traction, which can give you more confidence on slippery surfaces, but you also have more traction everywhere else. So it's really hard to pedal. It's a lot more difficult. So that's kind of the trade-off. Like you have that peace of mind, but I personally just it would not be able to ride a fat bike because they're pretty difficult to pedal. And we also are really good at salting our roads, and most of the time they are dry, and I have not found it to be I don't encounter slick spots very often when I'm biking, so I've not found a need to have, a wider tire. Another option to consider is internal gear hubs and single speeds and belt drives. So basically, like the more moving parts you have on your bike, the more stuff there is that is exposed to all of that road salt and grime and dirt and all the junk that's on the road, which can make maintenance really cumbersome and annoying. So internally geared hubs are the picture on the bottom left there, a regular, cassette that most of us are used to looking, regular drivetrain is right above that. And you can just see like how that picture of kind of what we would consider a normal bike, there's just so many moving parts and so much exposed metal and so many exposed components on the bike. But the internal gear hub, everything for the gearing is in this sealed compartment, and so it's basically maintenance free, and it will never be exposed to all of the stuff on the road that kind of corrodes the parts of your bike. There's still the chain that you have to take care of, but that's pretty much it. I have one of these, and it's amazing. I can attest to how easy it is to take care of because I really don't have to do anything with it. And then single speeds or fixed gear, they're similar but not quite the same. But basically, that's like you only have one speed. So they're not ideal for Duluth because we have hills, but they are less moving parts, so it's easier for maintenance. So depending on your commute, you might want to consider that, but I just don't really see that very much in Duluth. And then belt drives, that's the other picture here. These are not very common, but I don't know why, because I've also had a bike with one of these and I loved it. And this belt drive replaces the chain, and it's made out of, mine was made out of carbon. And so you literally, like, it can't rust. And if it gets full of gunk, you can just rinse it off, and it's pretty low maintenance. So if you do have a choice of, or if you are looking to like buy a bike or something, or even if it's a used bike, and you have the option to consider some of these things, those are a couple things to think about, or a couple options that might work well for winter, especially. And then the tires, again, like wider tires with tread, you're going to have more traction. If you have your tires at a low inflation, you'll also have better traction in soft snow. I don't really encounter a lot of soft snow on the roads in Duluth anyway, so I don't know how relevant that is to anyone, but just generally, you can add air for kind of packed snow or road conditions. And if you let some air out, you'll have a little bit better traction if you need it. Studded tires are another popular option. That's what the picture on the left and in the middle is. And it's just like little metal knobs, I guess, that are in the tire, and they really work wonders on ice. It's almost impossible to slide on ice if you have studded tires. This is the same trade-off as it would be with fat bikes, where yes, you have better traction, but they also are a little bit more difficult to ride and pedal just because you have that increased traction. And then they also make winter tires. And I've tried these as well and was pretty impressed with how well they worked. This was when I was using my skinny tired bike on the roads in the winter. Basically, this is the picture on the right. They have lots of grooves, so you have an increased surface area for such a small tire. And then they're made out of a different kind of material that stays more pliable in really cold temperatures. So you can still get some pretty good traction because it's not, the cold weather isn't like causing your tire to be stiff. So that would be an option to consider as well. And then people always want to know what I ride in the winter. So this is a picture of my bike on the right-hand side with the lights on it. And as you can see, there's nothing about it that would make it like winter. It has regular, 1-inch commuter, or maybe 1.5-inch commuter type tires. There's no like knobs on them. They're fairly smooth tires. It's an upright, I wouldn't quite call it a beach cruiser, but that's sort of what it looks like when I'm riding it. So it's the best bike I've ever had for winter, and I love it. And I got it for $150 used at the Spoken Gear yard sale. So if you're looking for something, you can if you can find them, used at stuff like that or on Facebook, if you're looking to get a new bike. And you have to put lights on in the winter because it's just pretty. Lastly, a couple pieces of equipment that might be helpful. Fenders, I would say, honestly, that's the number one thing I would recommend, because it's almost worse with stuff on the road in the wintertime than it is like riding in the rain, because you have all of the salt that's added to the road, which makes everything wet. Like the roads are usually, like, they're more often wet and slushy than they are dry or slippery in my experience. And so just like all that gross stuff from the road, you don't want that splashing up on you or your stuff. So fenders are key. And then they have these flat pedals that you can get for boots, like if you're just wearing winter boots, they're kind of like studs that stick up on them, but they basically just help keep your foot in place. And I think these are used more like for fat tire biking and mountain biking and stuff in the winter, but they work really well for bike commuting, because if your boot is wet and slippery, like, you don't want it to slide off the pedal, and that happens to me in the winter much more frequently than other times of year. So these are super nice because your boot these little studs keep your boot on your pedals. Visibility and lights. Again, like, if you're going to have lights, I recommend both front and rear lights. And because winter has low light and shorter days, it's a good idea to just keep your lights on your bike all the time in winter time. And you can put them on your helmet, on your handlebars, on your bags. Honestly, like, multiple places is better. Wearing brighter colored clothing can help you be more visible to other road users when it is dark. And then we already talked a little bit about the reflective material on clothing and your bike. And they even have things, if like strips, like sticky strips of reflective material that you can get at a bike shop. And then you can just like put it on things, on whatever you need to have it on. Are we having any questions? No. Okay. Costco has a fat tire bike for $420. That's amazing. Okay. Bike maintenance, you have to do a little bit more in the wintertime than you do the rest of the year when it comes to bike maintenance. It's always, brush off kind of the minimum that I would recommend is brushing off the debris and the street slush. You don't really want that hardening on your bike chain and parts of your bike. If you can avoid leaving it outside in the snow and rain, that is always preferable. And then just be aware that moving it frequently in and out, like if you have indoor bike parking that's heated at work, for example, but you keep it in your shed at home, that can cause melting and refreezing and just is a little bit harder on the bike components. And so you just have to be aware of that and that you might need to, lube the chain more often than you would otherwise. Keeping the chain and drivetrain clean after wet and dirty rides. You can wipe down the brake pads and the rims. That's always a good idea. And then using a winter specific or wet specific chain lube is recommended. And this is the one that I used that you can get. I got at Continental. It's great. It has like dissolved wax in it, so that just kind of adds like an extra layer of protection in the winter time, and works really well. Winter cycling conditions. The things that are a little bit different in winter than the rest of the year are, again, we have low sun angles, so it can be easy for people to not see you. So being aware of that while you're biking, to stay safe, just like always assuming that people don't see you, is a good idea to be a defensive bicyclist. We have fewer hours of daylight. There's wet conditions a lot, so like leaves and anything that's metal tend to be really slippery when it's wet, so just be aware of that. Temperature changes throughout the day really affect road conditions. So you could go to work and the roads are dry, and when you leave, it snowed 7 feet while you were at work. Or it could be like really wet and slushy when you go to work, and then the temperature drops, and when you go home, everything is frozen and it's solid ice. So just being aware that things change constantly in the winter time, and having a backup plan if you're not comfortable in all of the conditions that might occur, is always a good idea. And just even bringing extra, like if you need extra layers or anything to uh, get through those differing conditions at the end of the day, just kind of planning it out and thinking ahead. The types of snow that you might encounter. Packed snow is actually pretty easy to ride on. It's hard surface. That packed snow can actually be a little bit sticky too, which is really nice. Mashed potatoes, this is the worst, and it's exactly what it sounds like. And it's usually thick and sticky and hard to get through. And it's like that combination of like snow and dirty slush. Slush, that's another really common one. It's, wet, and if it is starting to get a little below freezing, or if it's been a while since they kind of salted the roads, like that can start turning into ice. So just being aware of that. And then powder snow, the only time you really encounter that is like if it's literally snowing, and that can be pretty nice to ride in if it's not thick. It, again, um, offers a little bit of stickiness, so it's pretty easy to ride in. Biking on snow and ice, basically just slowing down, being cautious. That's the number one thing I could recommend. Motorists might have limited visibility because they have ice on their windshield or snow. Going multimodal, this is a great time to do that if you need to. Being able to like hop on a bus if you have to, or walking, or leaving your bike somewhere and getting a ride. That's an option to help you get to where you're going. Lane positioning is a little bit extra important, I guess, in the wintertime. Like I'll often have to take the full lane if the shoulder is too snowy. Don't share the lane with drivers if it's too narrow because you don't want people trying to squeeze past you and sideswiping you. So it's legal for you to ride anywhere in the travel lane. And again, recognizing that that can be intimidating, know that you can do it. And if you have to, it's your safety versus someone else's convenience, and I'd rather not put someone else's convenience ahead of my own safety. So here is a picture of an instance where like there's not enough room, so you have to move into the traveling lane. Or here's another one, use the bike lane. Did you know there's a bike lane under this? Like it's just gone. There are no bike lanes in winter, basically. This is 4th Street. I took this picture the other day. So you have to ride in the actual car travel lane if the space on the side of the road is full of ice or snow or debris or cars. And I've found that people are usually, I mean, it's pretty obvious to see that you have no other choice. So I haven't really encountered a lot of hostility from drivers, I guess, in the wintertime because it's pretty clear to see that there's nowhere else to bike. Okay, handling. We're running out of time, so I'm going to go through this really fast. Slowing down, that's again #1 recommendation. Staying relaxed and loose. Like if you're really rigid, it's harder to kind of correct your bike if you start to slide. Obviously, no sudden moves, sharp turns, or slamming on your brakes. Look at the road to find a dry spot. If you do have to brake or make a turn, if you do end up going into a snow rut, ride it out. If you start to slide, go with it. Do not try to brake if you start to slide. You might be kind of moving or sliding down the roadway sort of like sideways for a few feet, and that's okay. Like just go with it and just try to maintain your balance, and you can correct once you slow down enough or once you stop. And yep, pick your snow. You'll figure out like what's easier to ride on and walk when you need to. Okay, couple of resources, and I can take questions too in a minute here, but Winter Bike to Work Day is next week, and this is an annual event. You can check that out. Usually there's like a bike commuter station. That's not happening this year due to COVID, but that's something we have done in Duluth. The International Winter Cycling Congress, I've mentioned this a couple of times. This is next week, and this year, because it's virtual, it also is very affordable. It's like 20 euros, which was like $24, I think is what it came through as. And even though this is something that I've attended because my job in the past was related to it, even personally, if you want to know more about winter cycling, this is absolutely fantastic and I would highly recommend it. The 30 Days of Biking is a challenge that happens every year. That's another international campaign. It was started by a guy in Minnesota, actually, because he was like, well, if you can ride every day in April, even if it's just like down your driveway and back, April basically has spring, summer, fall, and winter all in one month, every kind of condition possible. So if you can do that in April, you really can bike it all year long. So it's a kind of easy way to ease into biking in many conditions. Bus Bike Walk happens every year in May, so keep an eye on Zeitgeist Facebook page for information on that. We Walk in Duluth is a great local advocacy group for biking and walking in transit if you are interested in getting involved. The Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota is the statewide bike advocacy network, and they do a lot of lobbying for changing laws to make it easier to bike. And they also have some educational resources on their website. And the League of American Bicyclists is our national level bike advocacy and education organization. And they have a lot of good tutorials too about some of that bike law and traffic principle stuff. And then lastly, just a shout out to the sponsors of Winter Bike Week. Because these events could not happen without these sponsors. So just really thankful to all of them for supporting Winter Bike Week. And my contact information I have on this slide as well, because I'm always happy to answer as many questions as people have, or just go for a bike ride with somebody or whatever.